FAQ psychoanalysis. We have completed all the schools of psychoanalysis we were to reflect upon. We now move towards the end of the book. And this chapter is not related to any school of psychoanalysis, but it addresses some general questions which people at large have, not only in India, but across the world. The question is, should I go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy? This question in some countries may be left to the discretion of psychiatrists. In some countries, may be left to licensed psychotherapists. And in some countries, it would be left to the individual. In most countries, it would be left to the individual. And the individual there has to make an informed choice. Our discussion today will enlighten individuals to make a more informed choice. So let us address some of the common questions people have when they are faced with a psychological difficulty. If you don't have any psychological difficulty, usually the question does not arise. Question 1. What is the concept of lines of defense? The concept of lines of defense is a very general concept applied in the area of military studies, applied in the area of biology, and also applied in the area of psychological health. The point is to preserve and enhance our psychological health. There are certain lines of defense that we can erect against pathology. Just as in case of biological health, the first line of defense is good food, good lifestyle. The second line of defense would be exercise and yoga. Third line of defense would be homeopathy. Fourth line of defense would be Ayurveda. Fifth line of defense would be allopathy. Unfortunately, we don't deploy the first four lines of defense. We directly deploy the fifth line of defense. And that has a great cost in terms of side effects and financial cost. So it is wise to have these lines of defense more preventive than curative in approach. Similarly, in psychotherapy also, we can conceptualize a situation of lines of defense. The first line of defense is a good and happy lifestyle, a balanced lifestyle. Second line of defense is counseling. Third line of defense is psychiatric help and tablets. Fourth line of defense is short-term therapies like CBT or ISTDP. And the fifth line of defense is psychoanalytic psychotherapy or similar long-term therapies. These lines of defense have been created on the criteria of time, energy, and cost to be invested by the person. If those criteria are not a concern, you can change psychotherapy and put it ahead of allopathy. And you can then have allopathy as the last line of defense. In fact, before you go to allopathy, you can also try homeopathy. The core is that if we classify all problems into mild, moderate, and severe, if it comes to severe or moderate to severe, you can't escape allopathy. However, if you are dealing with mild, you can go through anything and by and large it will work. If it is moderate, it depends upon what it is, but largely psychotherapy or psychotherapy plus homeopathy plus lifestyle changes, they can do a lot of good. And if you find that if healing is not happening or it's degrading, then of course there is no way out but to go for allopathy. Within allopathy also, if you look at personality disorders or suicidal tendencies where one is bent upon destroying oneself because of a frustration of desire which cannot be given up, in such situations, even allopathy can't do much. So there again, allopathy can only play a secondary role. Psychotherapy has to play a primary role. In general, however, the concept of lines of defense, as a rule, it works. Exceptionally, of course, you may have to change the approach according to situation. So, should I go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy? I would say psychoanalytic psychotherapy is a very powerful therapy of the internal world, but it takes long and it costs you quite some amount of money and time. So if money and time is not a problem, it is worth exploring one's inner world. However, if money and time are a problem, and or if you don't have orientation to go towards the subtleties of the inner world, especially in terms of the unconscious working of the mind, then go for short-term therapies like CBT or ISTB. Second, is there a patient problem pathy congruence? In fact, there is, and it would be surprising if there is not. So there is, but few people acknowledge it. Followers of every school of therapy believe their school to be omnipotent, and this is nothing more than their own narcissism, self-righteousness, and a quest for omnipotence. They have invested their omnipotence into the school they follow. Obviously, it is not true. It's a problem to be solved. The task for the next 25 years is to create this grid of personality, pathology, intensity, and pathy. That given a personality, suffering from a given pathology of a particular intensity, what should be the approach of healing? Is psychiatry the best approach? Is psychotherapy the best approach? Are both of them together the best approach? If psychotherapy has to be included, should it be CBT type? Should it be ISTDP type? Should it be psychoanalytic type? Is it necessary to go to one, complete it, and then move to the other? Is it the situation that first you do CBT and then give a gap and then go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy? Should you combine psychotherapy with homeopathy? These kind of questions are actually research questions which will have to be answered in the next 25 years. And once we do have answers of that type, we will be able to create this grid of personality type, pathology, intensity, and healing approach. This has started in a small way. Comparative studies of different types of therapies for phobia have concluded that for phobia, CBT should be the first line of defense, first line of healing. And obviously, such studies always will be disputed for a long time before the professional community agrees on a consensus of some sort. But this is the task of next 25 years. So is there a congruence? Yes. Different pathies are geared towards addressing different problems. And each pathy, each approach, each school works better on certain problems and not so well on other. So there is a comparative difference in efficacy of different schools. This is disputed only by one finding which says that it is the therapist and not the school which matters. But there are nuances to it. If we remove that part of the therapist from those studies, the effect of the schools is definitely there. And one can see it in the conceptual structure and technique also. For example, if we are looking at fragile patients who are primarily seeking safety, schools which are based upon challenge and confrontation, like ISTDP, are the last things to work out. We need a more cohesion approach, a more humanistic approach, which are geared towards safety. If you are dealing with a repressed patient or patient dealing with obsession and repetition, maybe for some of them, confrontation and challenge may be the way out, and they might be using holding as a defense and free association also as a defense. So they are directed therapies, challenge-oriented therapies, focus-oriented therapies may give a better outcome. So yes, is there a patient problem pathy congruence? Yes, there is. Do we know adequately about it? No, at present we don't. Is it a task of future? It is. And the whole goal is to create this grid ultimately of personality, pathology, intensity, and healing approach put in that grid. That table has to be filled up in the next 25 years. 3. Are all people equally disposed to benefit from psychoanalytic psychotherapy, or does personality matter? Personality and culture both matter. To benefit from psychoanalytic psychotherapy, there are certain elements required in a person. First, he should be ready for long-term therapy, unstructured therapy, open-ended therapy, amorphous therapy. He should be interested in the inner world. Third, he should be capable of intellectual engagement to deal with the subtleties of the inner world. Fourth, he should be open enough to accept honestly and work on the most difficult parts of oneself, involving often, not limited to, but involving often, aspects of sexuality and aggression. Deeper and stronger the roots of the problem are, long-term therapies work better. If you cannot take or cannot face the difficult parts of oneself, then it's very difficult to be in psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Especially Kleinian therapy is one of the most difficult to bear if you are not ready for it. So there is a question of capacity also. Within psychoanalysis, those who find Freudian or the Kleinian, those who find Kleinian unbearable often go to Freudian. If they find Freudian also unbearable, they go to cohesion therapy or they go to the Jungian therapy. Jungian and the cohesion are one of the easiest forms of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. 4. Should I go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy? If you have a problem which is rooted in early childhood or in the unconscious mind, then yes, you should go for it. Alternately, if you just want to explore yourself in a Socratic sense, you should go for it. But you should be comfortable not to hold back anything. Let out the most embarrassing, difficult to accept parts of yourself. One way to prepare can be for some people, I'm not saying for everyone, a short-term therapy taken once can prepare you for a long-term therapy. Maybe you can go in a gradient from CBT to ISTDP to psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Or you can go another gradient, CBT to psychoanalytic psychotherapy, then to ISTDP. Both the gradients will work out for certain groups. What should I be aware if I go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy? You should be aware that of certain things, because like any structure, psychoanalytic psychotherapy also has its limitations and pitfalls. Some of the beware things are, first, don't get addicted to it. The amoral holding, the non-critical, non-attacking holding can easily become an addiction. It can become a narcissistic addiction. It can become a artificial safety addiction. So first is beware of getting addicted to psychotherapy, psychoanalytic psychotherapy. 2, don't develop too much of dependency which is irreversible on the therapist. 3, always remember life has to be lived outside the therapy room, not inside the therapy room. This happens to many people. They start living out in the therapy room and they don't have any life outside. Therapy room is a healing space, not a living space. It's like a hospital. You go there to be well. You don't build your home in the hospital. So, and lastly, be very clear that you have a knowledgeable and life experience wise experienced therapist. Don't go for a BA, MA, PhD type who has never gone to the real world outside of his college. So find a therapist who has worked in the real world after his college for some time, at least, before he became a therapist. He may have worked in the police, he may have worked in the army, in politics, in business, in NGOs, wherever he has worked. But he ought to have worked out there in the real world. BA, MA, PhD syndrome coupled with psychoanalytic psychotherapy is a deadly combination. They are very fanatic, very narrow, without any real life experience and flexibility that real life experience brings. So beware of these elements while choosing a therapist. And if you feel, trust your instinct. If you feel that after repeated consideration, if you feel that it's not working out, change the therapist. 6. Can psychoanalytic psychotherapy become an addiction I am not able to break off later? Yes, in some cases. Doesn't happen to everyone, but in some rare cases, yes. The separation becomes very difficult. It becomes addictive. One, it becomes addictive. Second, the separation becomes very difficult. Third, a dependence develops, and if one has not developed adequate attachments in the outside world, then it becomes even more difficult to give up. And therefore, termination, then if you try to terminate, you then have a withdrawal effect. Lastly, and very importantly, out of transference, the patient may develop very strong transferences and then he is not able to give up. It has not been worked through. And it's difficult to work through. Often, even in cases of healthy ending of therapy, long after the therapy is over, the transference is still there. It may mellow down, it may taper in intensity, but it is still there. 7, can you change the analyst in psychoanalytic psychotherapy? Yes, but it has to be done only after deep deliberation and consultation with the analyst you are working with and with the one you wish to go. And this is not something to be done lightly. It should be taken recourse to only if no progress is happening in the analysis, or if you just can't get along with the person. Despite best efforts by both of you, if you just can't get along, then of course you have to change. In some cases, either if you are about to enter into a dual relationship, or if your capability to pay the fees goes down, or your therapist moves to another city, or you move to another city, those also can be issues where you would have to change the analyst. Or if the analyst is old and he dies or he becomes sick, those are also the situations where a change of analyst is imperative. 8, can you change the school of psychoanalytic psychotherapy? Yes, but again, cannot be done lightly. After deep deliberation, talking to an analyst, and if necessary, taking some independent opinion from 2 or 3 other analysts, this decision can be taken. Honestly speaking, this decision should be taken by the analyst, and he should propose to you that you would be better benefited by some other school. But if that is not coming in and progress is not happening, one may have to undergo a change of the school of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Many popular and very famous psychoanalysts themselves underwent this experience. Wilfred Bion, Guntrip, I believe Winnicott also, Kohut also. I think they all underwent analysis with analysts of 2 different schools, I believe. So this is not unheard of. Often it may be necessary also, but to be done after deep deliberation. Can psychoanalytic psychotherapy be problem focused? Psychoanalytic psychotherapy is problem focused. Unlike pure psychoanalysis, which is wide and open. So psychoanalytic psychotherapy is focused on healing a pathology, whereas psychoanalysis proper goes wide into looking at everything from multiple standpoints, and healing is only one of the concerns of psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis is much wider, open, and less focused than psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Few people come for psychoanalysis now. Most people come for psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Rarely, if somebody is interested in a Socratic exploration of oneself, only then he comes for psychoanalysis. Usually today when people say psychoanalysis, what they mean is psychoanalytic psychotherapy. 10. Does every therapist go to a supervisor? Is confidentiality maintained there? Yes, every therapist has to have a supervisor. Does every therapist have one? Possibly no. Therapist did not discuss every case, every session, but some session, some case, we should occasionally discuss with the supervisor. Supervisors can be of two types, a general supervisor and a consultant supervisor. General supervisor who is there for a longer term, and when a problem comes which is specific to any school and requires expertise of that school, the supervisor may refer, or the two of them, therapist and the supervisor, may discuss and come to conclusion that consultant supervisor is required to address this problem for a short period of time. Is confidentiality maintained? Yes, confidentiality always is maintained. Supervisor does not know the identification of the patient, and the patient does not know the identification of the supervisor. Eleven. Is there Freud worship or client worship found in psychoanalysis? Abundance of it. You have devotees even in the temple of reason. Every school of psychoanalysis is eager to defend itself and attack the other. The spirit of accommodation and enrichment, synthesis, integration is not easy to find. There is too much of projection of omnipotence in one's own school. That creates fanaticism. When one's ego identifies with that omnipotence, that cannot change. If it changes, it's not omnipotence, and that creates rage. Because one is in search of omnipotence, at last one has found it, and you disturb that omnipotence. That loss of omnipotence creates rage. This is true even in academic publications. It's not easy to get any publication done unless you quote Freud, Klein, and masters of those type. So yes, there is a worship. Whether the worship is of true gods or false gods, that depends upon how you see it. 12. How open or closed this discipline is? As open or as closed like any other discipline. Every discipline has its own gods and its own demons, and psychoanalysis is no exception. That is the reason that no school in psychoanalysis expands to incorporate new findings. Usually a new school has to be created because the existing school is too rigid to accommodate any new idea. So this movement of conceptual and technique eclecticism. Sorry. That is absent. There is no movement of integration, synthesis, holistic psychoanalysis. It's very necessary, it's not there. Patients, however, have become more holistic than the practitioners of psychoanalysis, and at times with the knowledge of the therapist, at times without the knowledge of the therapist, they go holistic and make use of Reiki, pranic healing, yoga, crystal healing, along with psychoanalysis. So patients are far ahead of the therapists when it comes to going holistic. 13. Who are the ones who need psychoanalytic psychotherapy but never come to it? Many groups of patients need psychoanalytic psychotherapy but they don't come to it. Members of mystical or religious groups who are suffering from some psychological problem, they believe that their religious or mystical leader or his teachings somehow will magically, miraculously cure them. That is one group. Second group, that is not psychologically oriented, so they prefer psychiatric medication. Third, those who don't have adequate time, money, who cannot afford, they also don't come to psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Fourth, those who have heard not very charitable things about psychoanalytic psychotherapy, they don't come. And fifth, those who cannot face difficult parts of themselves. These are the 5 groups that need it, but they don't come. As a pathology, narcissistic pathology is one which needs it very badly, but few of them actually come. Similarly, for deep-seated psychosis, they need it badly, but they don't come. How much is the patient responsible for success or failure of the therapy? Substantially. Both are responsible, therapist and the patient. If you go by the patient, on the patient side, his responsibility lies in honest free association, in honest opening up of oneself, accepting the right interpretation where it is right. I'm not saying every interpretation, but a large proportion of it. To take it seriously and sincerely, and not to hide information. This is a very big problem, especially with celebrities and those who deal with large corporations, large amount of money, confidential legal issues, confidential political issues, confidential security issues. They just can't open up. They find it difficult to open up. And that is the patient's part, patient's responsibility part. And equally, there is a therapist's responsibility. One of the important elements is to take insights of therapy and apply them in the life outside. Not to create a schizoid situation of outside life and therapy room. So the patient has to work outside of therapy room to put insights into practice and consolidate the gains in reality. 15. Why do people drop out of therapy? There can be many reasons. It may just be cost or time. It may be difficulty to see the inability to see the difficult parts of oneself. It may be non-achievement of results. It may just be not be getting along with the therapist. It may just be a conceptual disbelief in the system itself. It may just be that the therapist is not doing something right, or it may just be the process itself is too unpleasant. Whatever be the reason, people can drop out of therapy. In fact, there is a lecture I have given. The recording is on my channel. The title is "Why Patients 50 Reasons Why Patients Leave." So I have listed out 50 reasons, and there would be more. What occurred to me, I listed out. And so if you answer this question, why people drop out of therapy, more than 50 reasons, some of which I have put here. 16. Is it true that going to therapy can trigger latent neurosis or latent psychosis? It is not off, it is on. latent neurosis or psychosis. In general, it does not happen, but in a few fragile cases, it may. And this brings us to Kernberg's classification of patients. Kernberg classifies patients into 3 or 4 categories. First category, who are so fragile that the frame of psychoanalysis itself is a difficulty for them. So they are not congruent, they are not suited for this particular form of healing. Second, those who can come into psychoanalytic psychotherapy but can be provided only holding. Third, who can withstand interpretations. And fourth, who can withstand challenges. So, if you get the first category and you put them into psychoanalytic psychotherapy, these extremely fragile patients, often with borderline or narcissistic characteristics, in some cases even fragile fragile system and obsessional symptoms. In those groups of patients, the therapy may trigger latent neurosis or latent psychosis. What is helpful here is this idea of Beyond's idea of latent personality types. Whether the person has a neurotic character type or a psychotic character type. And this is different from the symptoms. A neurotic structure may be suffering from a psychotic symptom, or a psychotic structure may be a person with a psychotic structure latent in the unconscious may be suffering from a neurotic symptom. But the structure becomes more important in this discussion than the symptom particular. If the structure is fragile and usually psychotic, then the danger of triggering something latent goes higher. Best way out then is to go for face-to-face and get into a cohesion mode. "17. Do you for sure get healed with psychoanalytic psychotherapy?" Everyone who goes to a doctor doesn't get healed. That doesn't mean you don't go to a doctor. The same is true of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Everyone who comes is not healed doesn't mean you should not go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy. The rule of 75 usually applies. The rule is 75% of people get healed to the tune of 75%. That rule of 75 usually applies. And that's more than enough of a reason to go for psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Does psychoanalytic psychotherapist force you into orientation of individualism, which is difficult to practice in Asian societies? There is truth to it, because psychoanalysis is a creature of modernity. And the 5 pillars of modernity are materialism, atheism, individualism, hedonism, and reductionist empirical science. The individualism and hedonism that psychoanalysis is rooted in, believes in, is contrary to the value system of collective societies of the East. And therefore, many of the interpretations given, they don't find a resonance in the reality of the society, in reality of the Asian societies. Usually therapists find a safe middle zone, and they have to customize the quintessential psychoanalysis to the society. In some societies, say very conservative societies like the Arab societies, it may not be possible to find a safe middle zone. So either you don't use Puritan psychoanalysis or you heavily customize it. But it's very difficult to put it there because there is no safe middle zone. So this cultural problem has not been solved as yet in psychoanalysis. Because if you practice it in the Arab societies and if a change happens in the flavor of psychoanalysis, essentially you are creating individuals that can't fit into society. Not because of their uniqueness, which is a different thing altogether, but because of the flavor of therapy. That's a very different issue altogether. Ninety. Do you start succumbing to the therapist's views as you continue with therapy? It may be so in the beginning as the transference, omnipotent transferences happen, parental transferences happen. But as therapy proceeds and healing happens, the patient discovers his authentic preferences and he becomes more comfortable in owning up his power and making his choices and expressing them without succumbing to anyone's views, neither that of the therapist nor of anyone else. So, post the middle of therapy, this problem doesn't arise. But for some part of it, early part of therapy, this may be at work as a transitional reality. If, however, this continues even after therapy has gone on for quite some time, then something wrong is happening in therapy. It probably is that either the person is too dependent, too fearful, and healing has not happened, or the therapist is too narcissistic and dominating, and some pathological relation has formed between them, conscious, unconscious, or both. 20. Are psychoanalysts happy and successful people in their personal lives? Quite to the contrary. Most therapists are far better in the therapy room than outside. In most psychoanalytic centers and cities, the therapists remain in therapist groups. They find it very difficult to relate to people outside of the therapy groups. The divorce rate, the suicide rate also is very high in therapists. So, healer heal thyself, preacher preach thyself is very true. It's easy to heal than to live. 21. Do psychoanalysts live incestuous social life within their professional cycle? It's very much so. They find it very difficult to relate with people outside of the therapy circle, outside of those who are trained in this therapy area. Very few therapists are healthy enough to really have a vibrant social life or a good social life. 22. What kind of people choose to become analysts? There have been many studies in the area, and some of the conclusions are a large proportion of people who become therapists have traits of narcissism and depression. Most of them have a disturbed childhood. Many of them have a unconscious streak of voyeurism. Many of them are lonely. Many of them have unfulfilled sexual or relationship desires. Many of them enjoy this position of authority and privilege to offer wisdom and not bring oneself into discussion. Some of them genuinely are on the positive side, who are therapists because they want to help someone. One group also is that which looked after some family member who was suffering from a psychological difficulty and then decided to be a therapist. So these are the two healthy groups, but largely we have pathological groups of people who get into therapy. The core is, do people, ordinary people in society, like to be with you? If people don't find you friendly, cheerful, positive, and worth spending time with, in all probability, if you are a therapist and this is the case, then there is a deep-seated pathology yet not healed. 23. Do most psychoanalysts have adequate width of life experience? Very few. Most of them don't. Most of them suffer from this BA, MA, PhD syndrome, where they have never gone out of the academic system. And it makes a world of difference if or not the therapist has had a width of life experience. Those who don't have the width of life experience, they become very self-righteous, inflexible, bookish, and often they can't relate to people who talk about some context which they have never experienced. 24. Is psychoanalysis a new religion? A new priesthood professing solutions to the problems of living? Critics have criticized it as such, that the therapist, like a priest, is giving judgments in the form of interpretations, and that the psychoanalytic theory is the new holy book by standards of which health and normalcy are to be judged, and the therapist is the omnipotent father figure to whom no questions can be asked, and that the technique and axioms of the founding fathers of each school are absolute, and it's hearsay to question them, and every different opinion is a resistance, and that the imperfections of the theory and its inability to satisfy empirical investigation are glossed over, and therefore we are talking of a new faith. This is the criticism of critics. But there are some differences. All of it, this criticism is not valid. Psychoanalysis, unlike religion, does not have any value system. It is amoral. It is not pro-faith or anti-faith. It is open to experimentation and peer review. Every 2 decades, we have a new school of psychoanalysis coming in. So it's not as closed to new schools as closed things are within a school. And every therapist in his training undergoes a personal experience and validation of the concepts of psychoanalysis, which is unlike religion. The belief in the concept is not faith-based, it is experience-based, very different. Lastly, as neurology advances, empirical evaluation of psychoanalysis becomes increasingly possible. And thereby, psychoanalysis is likely to get a more scientific foundation, and things will be scientifically accepted or rejected, which is very different from the status of religion in correlation to science, present science. Is psychoanalytic psychotherapy covered by insurance? In most countries, no. In developing countries, I think no psychotherapy is covered. In India, recently some products have been launched to cover psychotherapy, but they cover psychotherapy of in limited number of sessions, only if prescribed by a psychiatrist, and usually this therapy is CBT. I believe the way ISTDP is moving, it may also get covered by insurance, but psychoanalytic psychotherapy is unlikely to be covered by insurance. 26. Can one combine alternative healing techniques like Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, acupressure and others with psychoanalytic psychotherapy? Officially, no. Practically, yes. Practically, what has happened is patients have gone ahead of the therapist in going holistic. With knowledge of the therapist or without knowledge of the therapist, with his permission or despite his disagreement, not most, but a large group of patients has now gone holistic, and they are already combining these healing techniques like Reiki, pranic healing, Tai Chi, acupressure, crystal healing, and all sorts of things with psychoanalytic psychotherapy. What is efficacious, what is not efficacious? Those studies, unfortunately, have not been enough. And for those studies to be enough, psychoanalysis will have to be more open and free-spirited, which is yet not the case. But once it happens, we'll have the good studies to really see which combinations work for whom. 27. Can we take 5 most common everyday events you come across and explain them with psychoanalysis? Can do that. Freud wrote a full chapter, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, on this issue. Let's take 5 everyday instances. First, change in habits after death of a loved one. After a loved one passes away, often the person who survives starts doing things that the late person used to do. Some of the habits of the late person now become habits of the surviving person. It's a psychoanalytic explanation is it's a way of denial of loss by the unconscious telling itself that because what he used to do is still happening, his characteristics still exist. Therefore, he has not gone away, he is there. It's a denial by identification. And it's possibly the only way with which psyche can cope with the loss. Two, avoidance of celebrity or successful people. Some people just can't see interviews, stage performances, or felicitations of celebrities who are at the peak of their careers. That is, psychoanalysis tells us, owing to narcissism. The feeling is, I should be there, and why is he there? So there is envy and narcissistic rage towards those who are successful, and not seeing these interviews is to save oneself from the difficult feelings of narcissistic rage and envy, and also to cut them to size by not providing an audience. It's a annihilation by absolute omission. 3, fear of the boss. Fear of the boss, psychoanalysis tells us, is because of the fear of the father figure. If fear of the father of childhood is not resolved, the boss becomes terrifying. And often it would go to the unresolved Oedipus complex or the unresolved split. Because the boss is then seen as somebody who is going to torture and kill, not just order, which is what is supposed to do, but torture and kill. So this fear that the boss will torture and kill are projections onto the boss, displacement onto the boss of very early life ideas of the terrifying father. 4, people thronging to see a celebrity. This is the seduction of omnipotence, the seduction of narcissism. People project their omnipotence onto celebrities, and then even the trying to touch the celebrity or getting a autograph or getting photographed with the celebrity becomes a heavenly experience, because you are near the heavenly object, and the heavenly object has become heavenly because you have projected heaven from inside onto him. So first we project omnipotence, and then we crave to be near to that omnipotence or to experience that omnipotence. Experience of omnipotence can be by identification, or one can go manic, just going near the omnipotent object, or just being admired by the omnipotent object, or just being allowed by the omnipotent object to be near him. Such is the worship of the omnipotent object. 5. To have or not to have good possessions. Yeah. Many people find it difficult to buy good things or maintain them, even though they have the money and the desire to enjoy these things. This is because of the fear of object loss or attack on the object of love, or fear of one's own aggression that will destroy the object of love, and the unbearability of the pain when the object of love is damaged or destroyed. And this, of course, has very early life roots of the Kleinian type that we discussed in the Kleinian chapter. Some would keep postponing buying a new car. Some would have a car but give it off to people for many days. If you are going out and you keep car in somebody's garage, you don't take it back even after you are back for a month. So these are all the difficulties related to the object relations. And of course, they are rooted in early life experiences. With this, we complete this chapter with a quotation by Moglin and McLaughlin, and the quotation by McLaughlin is this: there are two main hazards of psychoanalysis, that it may fail and that if it succeeds. McLaughlin. Thank you.